Um,
Yeah, here you go.
First of all, thanks for the invitation. It's a pleasure for me to speak to young people from other countries, especially from Russia, on pertinent issues of the Marxist political economy. Um, I'll try to be as simple as possible and non-technical for lay people, meaning people without a very vigorous training in economics and political economy. Also, I've sent to Gleb the PowerPoint of my presentation, the presentation that we will use in today's lecture. He can freely circulate this with you. There's no problem with me regarding that. So to begin, let me share this presentation. I hope it is visible.
Yes, it's fine.
Um, Now, as you will probably have been notified, the subject of my talk is the following. In an era marked by artificial intelligence, is the Marxist labor theory value still valid? Um, Let me proceed directly and present the structure of my talk. The first part would be an introduction, actually. It will cover how the AI is being conceived and treated by mainstream economics. And my main argument there would be that mainstream economics, because they have a very technicist and narrow, myopic view of economic relations and processes. Uh, they cannot understand them as social processes. For this reason, they cannot not appreciate, explain and understand artificial intelligence properly. The second part would present how, at least in my humble opinion, the Marxist labor of theory of value uh, explain AI. And the next three sections would focus on specific issues. The first one is whether artificial intelligence commodities are valueless, and I'll argue to the contrary, meaning that artificial intelligence commodities contain value. Second, what is the nature of artificial intelligent capitalist firms, profits, whether there are monopoly rents or super profits, and I'll argue for the second case. The third issue is um, how artificial intelligence is related with the tendency of the rate of profit to fall. Then the last part will conclude. So that's the broad picture of what you are going to hear from me um, in this talk. And let us begin directly with the first issue, meaning how mainstream economics approach artificial intelligence. Well, it is true that the rapid introduction of information technologies, this is the bigger set of in which artificial intelligence is contained, uh, has been a puzzle for the science of the economy for more than 4 decades. Uh, please do remember that information technologies have started being applied more generally in the economy um, around around the 1980s. Not in the form of artificial intelligence, but in the form of internet, and this application was based on technological advances, namely microprocessors and things like this, and of course internet. Now, mainstream economics tried at that period of time, around the 1980s, to discover in information technologies a deus ex machina, something miraculous coming out of heaven that would solve the problems and the contradictions of the capitalist economy. So if they branded this application of information technologies in the economy as a new economy, where there would be robust productivity increases, and of course, no economic crisis. So that was the 1980s new economy fable meaning a myth, something very popular, very much tooted around, but having very weak empirical foundations, actually not having a good gearing in reality. The idea behind the new economy fable was that modern economies are fundamentally different from earlier industrial ones because information, knowledge, and data, rather than land, labor, and physical capital, have become the main drivers of value, productivity, and power. Now, the new economy myth was very soon rejected. In practical terms, it led to a stock market mini crash, the Nasdaq crash, or the dot-com bubble crash, meaning that a lot of capitalists have invested in stock exchanges, on industries and enterprises working on IT, and IT did not produce the expected profits, the envisaged profits. So that led to a mini crash, the dot-com crash. That was the empirical aspect. There was also a theoretical aspect of this demise of the new economy fable. Of course, there were critiques from the Marxist side, but there was a very famous critique, a very famous mainstream critique coming from Robert Solow, a doyen of neoclassical economics. Solow in 1987 proposed the so-called Solow paradox, saying that computers are everywhere except in productivity, meaning that despite massive investment in digital technology, aggregate productivity growth in developed economies has been sluggish. Now, this empirical fact is almost undeniable, and we take it up, this claim, regarding artificial intelligence as well. There were attempts to refute it, but all of them were quite weak. I'll skip this part. If it is necessary, I can expand in the questions and answers time section. Now, the contemporary introduction of artificial intelligence, and this happened actually in the beginning of the 21st century, meaning almost 20 years after the new economy fable, the introduction of artificial intelligence reinvigorated the debates around the role of information, and this in conjunction with robotics automation. This is robotic automation is a thing that's usually missed or sidestepped in mainstream debates. However, artificial intelligence as such does not necessarily has does not necessarily have a much application in the hard core of the economy, especially in manufacturing. It is artificial intelligence in conjunction with robotics automation that may have a significant impact in the so-called real economy and especially in manufacturing. So we have to be quite clear on these two issues. What you see following are two definitions. First, what it is artificial intelligence, and second, what is robotics automation. Artificial intelligence refers to the simulation of human intelligence by digital devices performing tasks such as learning, reasoning, problem solving, and decision making through techniques like machine learning, neural networks, and natural language processing. Robotics automation is the use of software robots to automate repetitive rule-based tasks typically performed by humans, such as data entry or transaction processing, but also in industry, meaning industrial robots. Now, mainstream economics have an almost schizophrenic attitude towards AI. They are divided between two blocks. The one are optimists and the other are pessimists. The optimists argue that AI-led growth economy would create more wealth and employment, and of course be void of crisis, economic crisis. Whereas the pessimists expect that AI would purge human labor from production and thus lead to an increase in unemployment and of course income inequality and poverty. I will argue that both views are equally problematic. The optimist view neglects the AI version of the Solow paradox, and the pessimist view actually terrorizes people and working people, threatening them through not empirically verified job losses. Let me focus on each of these arguments separately. First, I will argue that there is a Solow paradox version regarding AI, meaning that AI has not led, till now at least, to a spectacular growth of productivity. Now, we measure productivity traditionally as labor productivity. This is the way traditional mainstream economics and of course political economy, Marxist and classical political economy, measure productivity. In Marxist terms, there is no concept of capital productivity. In mainstream economics, there is a capital productivity. But the focus till the 1990s, both of mainstream economics and Marxist political economy was on labor productivity. Now, mainstream economics around 1990s proposed a new term, the total factor productivity, TFP. TFP is actually a black box. What we cannot explain, and it is not included in labor productivity. It is added to labor productivity, so we get a big number, an aggregate number, which is total factor productivity. Now, if we measure what has happened since the beginning of the 21st century, meaning since the introduction of artificial intelligence, either in terms of labor productivity or in terms of total factor productivity, we get a very dismal result, meaning that there is no spectacular growth of productivity, either labor productivity or total factor productivity. So Solow is an enterprise economist, said, paraphrasing, he's a mainstreamer, he said, paraphrasing Solow, that AI is everywhere except in the incoming macroeconomic data. Today you do not see AI in the employment data, productivity data, or inflation data. So one has to be very vigilant and, let's say, measured regarding the actual effect of the introduction of AI in the economy, and especially in the real economy, meaning the economy that produces wealth. The graph you can see there is from a study by Robert Gordon, 2016, and actually exhibits what we very well know, that since the 1950s, there is a downward trend in labor productivity. And this trend continues during the 21st century, meaning the century that AI has been introduced. Similar results can be seen in other studies regarding total factor productivity. For example, there is a recent paper by the Atlanta Fed, the Atlanta branch of Fed, the American Central Bank, very recent, and this study measures total factor productivity, and the results are pretty similar, meaning there is no significant increase in total factor productivity, and whatever increase there is, it is meager. For the US economy, it's an increase of 2.5%. This is not a significant increase in productivity. This slide shows a different thing. I spoke before about studies taking into account actual macroeconomic data, meaning looking backwards, data we have collected until 1 year before the day of the study, usually. Now, here in this graph, we can see a very intriguing deviation. It is again by a study by the Atlanta section of Fed, of the American Central Bank. It has to do with how CFOs, chief financial officers of big enterprises, report their expectations regarding the adoption of artificial intelligence. On the left-hand side, you see what they report as their expectations. They are quite high. In the right-hand side, it is what is being implied by the use of actual data, meaning by making a projection, extrapolation on the basis of actual data. And there is a marked difference, meaning that CFOs may report very high numbers, have very high expectations, but the actual reality is much less. And also there are, as you can see, big differences between different sectors of the economy. For example, both the expectations and the actual data uh, reveal that AI has a big impact, or at least a bigger impact, in finance and high-skill services, whereas it has a much lower impact on low-skill services and, of course, in manufacturing and construction. So the optimist view in mainstream economics, we have a new economy, a new AI economy, which would be lead to some technological revolution, technological industrial revolution, should be not be should not be accepted. There are problems there. Now, there is a weak defense by the optimists, the one by proposing two arguments. The one is that there is a J-curve pattern, meaning, okay, AI has not till now shown its abilities, its possibilities for growth, but this is because productivity works with increases with a time lag. Now we have almost more than 10 years since the introduction of AI, and this argument has not been materialized, meaning what time lag should we have in order to see robust productivity increases. And then the second is actually, it's not an argument, it's an evasion, sidestepping the problem. They say that there is a measurement problem, meaning that the way we calculate the GDP cannot account properly for the role of AI. Okay, I will not go into that. I think it's more than an evasion rather than a robust argument. Now, in this slide, you can see another important issue, meaning that the AI has different levels of applicability and different levels of impact among the different sectors of the economy. So there is almost a consensus, both in mainstream economics and in Marxist political economy, that there are the sectors that are expected to see large gains of finance and insurance, professional and technical services, legal services, and high-skill services. All of these are services, belong to the service sector. Whereas sectors that are expected to see minimal impact, even in conjunction with robotics automation, are forestry and fisheries, construction, accommodation and food services, field-based industries, and there is a big question regarding manufacturing. What will happen there? Now, the other side of the other camp in the mainstream in mainstream economics are the pessimists. The pessimists, as I've already said, argue that AI will lead to a massive displacement of human labor, thus leading to massive unemployment, and of course massive unemployment would lead to income inequalities. Workers would have meager incomes. The wage would be reduced even more, and of course this will lead from one point and afterwards to an increase in poverty. So their line of thinking is that AI, the introduction of AI would increase unemployment. Increased unemployment would imply increased income inequality, and as a consequence of this, and in relation to this, not as a consequence, increase in poverty, meaning poverty, the segments of the population that fall underneath a median level. Now, the data, I've not delved more on this, but it is easy to find relevant data, do not support this case, meaning that till now, the introduction of AI in economic processes has not led to massive unemployment. It has led to significant unemployment in several service industries, several service sectors. But basically, they have led to a workforce reallocation, meaning moving workers from one sector to another. Now, the rest of this paper will leave aside the mainstream problematics, and it will concentrate on the issues that AI and its application in economic processes poses for Marxist and radical political economy. So I'll proceed directly to the second section of my presentation. Sorry, before that, there is a broader issue, an almost, I would say, an ontological issue, which of course bothers both mainstream economics and Marx's political economy. And this issue is that whether AI can replace human intelligence. By many, either in mainstream economics, by a minority, and of course there is the different opinion. I will side with the second view, meaning that AI, it is what the term says, artificial intelligence, it's not human intelligence. And it cannot be, at least given the current data and conditions, it cannot be human intelligence. This fear that AI might become conscious stems from a very narrow view of consciousness. Actually, this very narrow view of consciousness is not only technicist, it's basically asocial, not social, cannot understand social relations. It assumes that the brain, if we can have a technical, more powerful computer than human brain, it can be sidestepped, moved aside. In truth, human thought is fundamentally different from AI information processing. Human thinking arises from practical social activities aimed at meeting real needs. We form ideas that capture meaningful relations between things, guided by our need, exactly what even the most advanced AI lacks. AI can perform certain intelligent tasks, sometimes at a superhuman level, but it does so passively. It collects data without understanding context or purpose. In short, AI speaks about things it cannot actually understand and feel. It doesn't know that the data represents real objects with real relationships and properties. And this is the big difference with human intelligence. And at least at the time being, artificial intelligence has not been shown capable of substituting this. Now let me proceed to the second section of my talk, the Marxist labor theory and AI. For those that are not connoisseurs, not disciplined, well informed about the Marxist labor theory of value, let me summarize it. The Marxist labor theory of value is actually the cornerstone of Marxist political economy. It is the toolbox through which Marxism analyzes the economy. Its main arguments are the following, very simply codified. First, that human labor creates value. Second, that dead, meaning past labor, human labor exercised, expended in the past, is incorporated in the means of production and transfers its value to the final project, of course with the necessary wear and tear and moral depreciation, meaning that there are losses in this transfer process. The crux of the matter is that dead labor, meaning the means of production, do not have creative abilities and cannot create new additional value. They depend and they depend on living labor, and they support living labor in creating new value. Living labor, meaning variable capital, has creative ability and does two things. First, covers its costs paid by the capitalist. This is the value of labor power. And B, creates new additional labor, surplus labor, which is unpaid by the capitalist, and it is expressed as a surplus value. And of course, surplus value is the source out of which capitalists' profits emerge. And hence, dead labor assists living labor in creating new value, but it cannot create new value on its own. Even automation still depends on human labor, designing, supervising, maintaining, and reconfiguring the production process and the operation of automata, or of automatic machines. I'll skip this. It's just for this slide is just for graphical purposes, for pedagogical reasons. It incorporates what I've already explained. Also, this graph says the same thing. Constant capital, meaning dead labor, transfers its value with some loss because of wear and tear and moral depreciation to the total commodity value. Living labor transfers its cost, meaning the value of labor power, variable capital, but also generates surplus value, which is also incorporated in the total commodity value. So the equation of top, fundamental Marxist equation, argues that the value of a commodity consists of three parts: constant capital, meaning dead labor; variable capital, meaning one part of living labor; and surplus value, the other part of living labor, the new value. So these three portions, the aggregate of these three portions is the value of a commodity. Now, is there a difference in this scheme with AI? Many argue that AI generates our output without ongoing human input. For example, generate text, images, code automatically on its own without input from labor. And thus it replaces not only manual labor, but mainly intellectual labor. So if this view is correct, then AI can do thinking work, meaning that labor is no longer the source of value. If this argument holds, then of course the Marxist labor theory of value and the Ricardian, the classical political economist labor theory of value, that of Ricardo and Adam Smith, becomes redundant, useless. Now, this question has generated a debate within the Marxist political economy. There are two camps there. The one argues that the labor theory of value is still applicable in the context of knowledge capitalism, and you see several references of authors supporting this view, and there is the opposite view, arguing that no, the labor theory of value is not relevant anymore in the era of artificial intelligence. I will support the first view on the following points. First, in my opinion, artificial intelligence is dead labor. Why? Because even the most advanced artificial intelligence systems are based on human-created data. They did not came out of the blue, but they are based on human-created data in the past. Second, they require human maintenance and infrastructure. And third, they rely on energy, hardware, and production processes. If we delve a bit more on this issue, before an AI model produces a single output, it requires an enormous one-time expenditure of labor, which includes data labeling, cleaning and labeling data to train models, software engineering, meaning highly skilled living labor writing the architectures. Third, intellectual data scrapping, workers extracting this data from various sources. And fourth, production of electricity for the operation of servers, infrastructure, etc. Second, AI uses often unpaid living labor. Two sources there. First, prompt engineering, meaning that generative AI does not operate in vacuum. It requires human prompts, curation and correction. And in many industries, workers using AI are effectively becoming free variable capital, training the AI through their interactions without being compensated for the value their corrections generate. And this unpaid labor is even, this problem of unpaid labor is even graver in the case of the gig economy, the platforms. Many services marketed as fully automated AI actually rely on hidden human labor in low-wage countries, a phenomenon known as Foxtomation or the mechanical Turk. Third, AI's thinking abilities based on the human general intellect. Now, the term general intellect is a very interesting and, in my opinion, very opposite term introduced by Marx in the Grundrisse, especially in the chapter on the fragment on machines. And it defines general intellect as the collective social knowledge, science, intellectual capacity produced by humans, of course, and embodied in production. And the fourth reason, in my opinion, is that AI assisted factories still depend on human labor. Unmanned factories are not truly unmanned. They still need workers to operate, maintain, and restructure them. Let me uh, narrate to you actually an example. 1 year ago, I was on a visit in China, and they took us to a factory, a very big enterprise actually, bottling water. And they saw us a very big factory in which was operated by robots. And now especially the part of the factory that took bottles and placed them on cartons and then moved them to be shipped around, transported around. Now, the impressive part was that there were approximately 10 robots doing this work. There were also two human driven machines. The human driven machines were faster because the robots had sensors. So when the path of one robot crossed with the other, they had to stop. And then they stopped slowly. They started again moving slowly. When this process was done by a human driven machine, it was much faster. And the most curious thing was that if you looked, okay, that was the factory room, the big factory room. But on the edges of it, near the walls, there were approximately 20 Chinese workers, humans, with old machinery, because they were the only ones that were able to tackle the walls and the corners in the walls and things like this. So in a very highly automated factory, there coexisted robots, human-driven machines, and manual work. So in my opinion, and this factory was exhibited to us as a very, how can I say, a very modern automated factory. So in my opinion, and in the opinion of other Marxist political economists, AI should be considered as constant capital, meaning dead labor embodied in the means of production. This exemplifies this process. And this slide visualizes what I have already said, meaning that the AI output is based on 4 layers of human activity behind it. And these 4 layers are the layers I have explained before. This is a graph showing the reasoning behind Marx's argument about the general intellect, meaning social knowledge, general intellect, that is being produced by human labor, and it is being objectified in AI systems, meaning dead labor. Now, further on the previous debate, there is another debate within Marxist political economy, and this concerns the issue whether AI commodities are valueless, meaning whether they contain value or not. And there the argument moves not to on what issue, on the following issue. Those that support that the argument that AI commodities are valueless argue that an AI product has almost negligible cost, zero cost. So they say if it has zero cost, then it doesn't contain value. This is sometimes referred in the literature as the peculiar cost structure of AI commodities. Meaning that there is an extreme disparity between the high cost incurred in the production of the prototype on the one hand and the relative negligible costs for its reproduction. To write a code or a software might be quite expensive in the beginning, but then these guys argue that to replicate it in a DVD, a CD, a DVD, or a flash or whatever, or in the cloud, has almost no cost. Now, there is an excellent paper by Arboledas Lerida in Science and Society that shows that the valueless argument misinterprets Marx's concepts of wear and tear and moral depreciation, but it is also unrealistic. Let me be as simple as possible on these issues. Marx has said, and this was has argued, and this was actually very realistic, that the means of production, meaning dead labor, transfer the value, the embodied labor, to the final output, meaning the value of the product produced. Now, this transfer is not without losses. What are the losses? Two kinds. The one kind is wear and tear. When I use a machine, it gradually loses its ability to work. It needs maintenance, and at some point, it dies. It becomes inoperable. This is not a physical, a technical wear and tear, gradual loss of value. There is another case, which is moral depreciation, meaning that if some other capitalist discovers and employs a new means of production, more profitable than the old one, then the old means of production has to be scrapped, even if its own physical value has not ended. Why? Because it's no longer profitable. So the dead labor transfers its value to the final product, but with two conduits, two circuits, two sources of loss of value. The one is the physical loss, wear and tear, and the second is the economic loss due to the introduction of a new, more profitable technology, which is moral depreciation. We know that both these cases are pretty realistic. Now, the argument that those that say Rotten Tehera, for example, argue that knowledge-intensive commodities do not contain value because they have almost zero costs, usually focuses only on software. It doesn't understand, it's not very applicable when it has to do with, for example, industrial automation, industrial robots employing artificial intelligence. As in the water factory, the Nongfu factory I described before in China. Even there, this is not very convincing. There still exist reproduction costs, for example, electricity pulses, and small costs are not zero costs. And in any case, this cannot be generalized to the majority of AIs, meaning what is possibly applicable to software, it is not applicable in the case of AI commodities in general, for example, electrical vehicles. So, in my opinion, AI commodities contain value. And this graph explains the difference between physical degradation, wear and tear, and technical obsolescence, meaning moral depreciation, and how these two processes apply to knowledge-intensive or otherwise AI commodities. I'll skip this, it's just a repetition of the previous slide. And let us move to another burning issue. Okay, there is an argument nowadays that AI enterprises and the AI capitalist firms are the leaders in profitability, meaning they accrue exorbitant profits, at least compared to more normal capitalist firms. Someone might get this notion if he looks at the stock exchange valuations. In stock exchanges, at least in the West, the enterprises working on with AI and things like this have, for the time being at least, the highest valuation. This does not necessarily mean the highest rate of profit, in Marxist terms at least, because a valuation in the stock exchange is a fictitious capital valuation. It has a relation to the actual rate of profit, but it is an ambiguous relation. It's more of a bet. But in any case, AI firms have high valuations in the stock exchanges. Of course, on the other hand, one must take into account what happened a few months ago. I mean, huge investment has been thrown into NVIDIA and other Western AI firms. There was a so-called bubble, AI bubble in the stock exchange. And then the Chinese came out with DeepSeek, a much cheaper technology that was equally competent or even more competent than Western AI in performing the same tasks. And of course, there was a mini crash in the stock exchanges in the West because investors said we have thrown a lot of money into NVIDIA, and we now see a Chinese green shoot company, totally unknown a couple of months before, doing the same much cheaper. Anyway, so there appear to be high profits in the AI sectors, in the AI enterprises, but there are reservations regarding these high profits. In any case, there exist high profits for AI enterprises, enterprises producing AI. Now, there is another debate there within Marxist political economy. The one side argues that these are monopoly rents, whereas the other side argues that AI producing and enterprises producing AI's the profits of enterprises producing AI are typical capitalist profits. I'll take the second side. Why? The first camp, the one that argues that AI firms get monopoly rents, in my opinion, are totally wrong. They might have a technological edge, and the technological edge gives you monopoly power to a certain extent, but we know very well that monopolies, as Lenin said in one of his latest texts, monopoly is born out of free competition, and it collapses within free competition. In empirical terms, we know that capitalist economies move through ebb waves of mergers and acquisition, meaning that there are periods when mergers and acquisitions increase, meaning we have bigger and fewer firms in the economy. This is a trend towards monopolization. But these periods are then followed by periods of withdrawal, meaning that mergers and acquisitions decrease. So we have more firms and smaller firms in the market. So there is not a general trend towards monopolization. Rather, we have a cyclical move. And this empirical pattern is valid at least since the beginning of the 20th century till now, when we have pretty accurate data regarding mergers and acquisitions. Now, the camp that argues that AI producing firms are monopolies has two versions. The more fancy but less scientifically serious is the so-called techno-feudalist argument, argued by extreme right-wingers like Steve Bannon in the US and quasi-Marxists like Centric Diran in France and my fellow countryman Yanis Varoufakis in Greece. A guy that once said that he's an erratic Marxist. In my opinion, he's too erratic to be a Marxist. Anyway, that's a big discussion. Now, the techno-feudalist argument, in my opinion, is totally unrealistic. Why? Because it argues that capitalism has ended and we knew in a post-capitalist era which resembles to feudalism. So there are the feudalists, which are these monopolies, which do not operate like normal capitalist firms, meaning facing antagonism, and which extract um, um, unpaid labor by the users of internet platforms and things like this. Now, this is a very fancy but totally unrealistic uh, picture. It is good for producing a science fiction, but it does not stand well regarding empirical observation. Um, the more serious version of this is the argument that these are more monopolies. Um, this is a more serious version. It doesn't argue that capitalism has ended and we live in a post-capitalist period, um, but it argues that capitalism has become monopoly capitalism. So gradually, there won't be any competition. Now, this is a view of rent, which is pretty mainstream and not Marxist. Um, they understand mainstream economics argue that under free competition, um, each firm will in the end receive a small profit called normal profit, almost insignificant, meaning that the income of the capitalist would be a bit higher, but not too much from that of a wage earner. So normal profits are insignificant. In general equilibrium, profits do not play any role. They are very limited, very marginal. So in macroeconomic, in mainstream macroeconomics, either Keynesian or neoclassical, the profit rate and the mass of profit plays no role whatsoever. Why? Because normal profits are supposed to be very small. When we have higher profits, higher incomes to the owners of an enterprise, then mainstream economics understand this as a rent, meaning something that is not that is being received because of monopoly, some form of political, let's say, domination, of ownership of assets that shouldn't have happened. So for mainstream economics, the only way that they can explain high profits is if they attribute them to monopoly, to a deformation of the market. And for this reason, extreme right-wingers like Steve Bannon or the neo-Austrians argue that AI producing firms are monopolies. This led to a deformation of the market, a deformation of free competition, and the accruance of rent to them, and of course, a properly working capitalist economy should break these monopolies. Now, Marxism has a different view. Marxism argues that, Marxist argues that there can be different profits. There is an average profit as a center of gravity, but in capitalist competition, in real competition, the innovative capitalists or even monopolies, which are still transient, can have extra profits, profits above the average rate of profit. Why? Either because they have innovated or because they have a monopoly on some resource. In both cases, this is a transient phenomenon. It cannot last forever. The case I presented before, NVIDIA versus DeepSeek, is a typical example. If the monopoly rent theory was valid, then DeepSeek wouldn't be able to actually torpedo NVIDIA. On the one hand, you had NVIDIA, a big Western firm, and then you had, on the other hand, a Chinese dwarf. And the Chinese dwarf torpedoed the giant. So, in my opinion, AI firms can acquire extra profits, but these are transient. They are not monopoly profits. They are extra profits because they have innovated. But in the course of real competition, as Marxism understands competition, these extra profits would be dissolved in the future. And of course, some other firm might acquire extra profits. Now, there is a political consequence of the monopoly rent theory. Morozov, a French colleague, has very aptly pointed out this. If one subscribes to the monopoly rent theory, then it is as if the left's theoretical framework can no longer make sense of capitalism without mobilizing the moral language of corruption and perversion. And the moral language of corruption and perversion is actually a language useful for intra-capitalist conflicts, but not for socialist policies and socialist strategy. The usual game, at least in the West, within the capitalist polity and economy, is that one side accuses the other of being corrupted. And usually the side that accuses the other for being corrupted are those that are not corrupted enough, or they are out of the system of corruption and they want to get in. The position taken by Marxism is quite different. It says that corruption is part of the normal operation of the capitalist system. So it would be there, bigger or lesser, but it will always be there. And the issue is not to throw the corrupted out in order for some uncorrupted to come in charge of the capitalist polity and economy, but to overthrow the capitalist system in general. Now, let me move a bit fastly. The next point I want to argue is that AI actually leads to an increase of the falling rate of profit. The Marx thesis regarding the law of the tendency of the rate of profit to fall is the following. These are the terms: the organic composition of capital, meaning the ratio between dead and living labor; the rate of surplus value, meaning the rate of exploitation. It's the ratio of surplus value to variable capital, meaning unpaid living labor to paid living labor. And the rate of profit is the ratio of surplus value over the cost price of the firm, meaning what a capitalist is paying, and is paying for means of production and wages. Now, it can be very easily shown that if we combine these three equations, we get the synthesis equation at the end, meaning that the rate of profit depends on the rate of surplus value, positively on the rate of surplus value, meaning that when the surplus value, rate of surplus value increases, then the rate of profit increases. But the rate of profit is related negatively to the organic composition of capital, meaning that when the organic composition of capital increases, then the rate of profit necessarily falls. Why? Because an increase of the organic composition of capital means the expulsion of living labor from the production process, and the living labor is the one that creates surplus value. Okay, I'll skip this, another visualization of this relation, the tendency of the rate of profit to fall. Now, I will argue that if the introduction of AI leads to an increased unemployment, not to the extent that the pessimist mainstreamers argue, but an increased unemployment, at least in several sectors, this would mean a massive accumulation of dead labor and, of course, displacement of living labor. And in this case, the rate of profit would be pushed downwards. Now, of course, there are mechanisms that counteract the falling profitability tendency. In the case of AI, these mechanisms are the following four. First, AI can lead to in the intensification of labor and the wage suppression. Both of them imply a cheapening in the value of labor power, meaning decreasing wages, and of course leads to an increase in the rate of surplus value. And an increase in the rate of surplus value is a counteracting tendency in the falling rate of profit. Second, the use of unpaid labor, inputs by AI users, means that there is a reduction in the costs required for variable capital. So this can also counteract the falling profitability trend. Third, there can be a cheapening of constant capital by producing less expensive machinery, software, etc. In the example I proposed before, the NVIDIA versus DeepSeek case, this is a very accurate example. DeepSeek used old processors, much cheaper, connected in a more clever way, so it produced very cheaply results similar or even better with the high-end computers used by NVIDIA, and of course with a higher cost. And there is a fourth reason, an acceleration of the turnover time, meaning that AI might help to do several tasks faster than before. And of course, this affects the turnover time of capital, meaning when an investment can produce results. Now, and as I'm moving closer to the end of my talk, this table summarizes how Marxist political economy and how mainstream economics view AI and value creation. For Marxist political economy, the first column codifies who creates value. For Marxist political economy, value is created by labor. That labor transfers its value with wear and tear and moral depreciation. Living labor creates additional value. On the contrary, for economics, value comes from the marginal contributions of all production factors, labor, capital, technology. Human labor has no special role in this. Now, what is AI? For Marxist political economy, AI is constant capital, whereas for economics, AI is productive capital. It belongs to the technology production factor. If AI is an independent creator of value, for Marxism, no. For economics, yes. And then there is another issue, what are the basic determinants of all these processes. For Marxist political economy, in the end, these are the social relations, meaning how AI has been invented and how is being applied in the economy. This depends on social relations and of course on class struggle. Whereas for economics, there are no such thing of social relations, only technological factors matter. And my conclusions are the following. The emergence of new phenomena such as AI and robotics require a deeper understanding of Marx's labor theory of value and its creative application in the context of the new era. Mainstream views oscillate between optimist and pessimist views. Both perspectives fail to situate AI within social relations. They understand it as a technological project, void of the society. And on the contrary, Marxism should comprehend AI not merely as technological change, but fundamentally as a reorganization of the total circuit of value that on the one hand enhances capitalist profitability, while on the other hand creates new contradictions and possibilities for transition to socialism. Just to throw an idea there, if planning, central planning, democratic central planning, but central planning is the basic coordination mechanism for a socialist economy, then information technologies and AI can help do this job. They cannot do this job by themselves, but they can help do this job much more easily and much more efficiently than in the past, when you needed to make a lot of calculations, and a small error could lead to a bigger error afterwards and things like this. And of course, for those of you that know the so-called socialist calculation debate, that was one of the main issues, saying the new Austrians, for example, saying that socialism is not feasible because it cannot do accurately and in realistic time all these calculations that the central planning requires. AI might be a great help in this. So that's the end of my talk. The floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you very much. It was very interesting, I guess. It was interesting for young students and for researchers who work in political economy already as well. So please, colleagues, do you have any questions? Do you want to ask it right now? I have some that were written me in chat, but if someone wants to ask a question now. Okay, if not now, I can start reading questions that were sent to me. First of all, a question from Ekaterina. Quite a long question, but I will try to read it carefully. So historical studies suggest that the productive effects on general purpose technologies only become apparent decades later, after many economic processes have been reorganized. Do you believe that in the case of neural networks and the large-scale language models of artificial intelligence, the adoption lag will be shorter due to their programmatic nature and low adoption threshold, or conversely, longer due to the need for a profound restructuring of the human resource system?
Well, yeah, that's a very interesting question. I already mentioned something regarding that. It is the so-called J-curve argument. The J-curve argument says argues the following: when you have the introduction of a new technology, then first you pay a lot for it, and then it takes some time for this new technology to produce results. What results? Basically an increase in productivity, right? That's the issue that the J-curve argument argues. So in the case of AI, the proponents of the J-curve argument say, okay, we do not see AI in productivity data, in output, in other macroeconomic variables, but this will take time. Okay, the introduction of AI has begun since 2005, 2006. It has almost 20 years now, if my memory does not fail me. It's quite a long time for the J-curve argument to hold. Okay, one can accept that the introduction of a new technology will take time. How much time? And of course, it's still an open issue. But for the time being, this argument does not sound very convincing. Don't know if I helped.
Yeah, it's clear. So, but what if the program can become extremely stronger, and the everything that we knew about artificial intelligence before will not be relevant in 5 or 10 years, for example?
Possibly, but this is futurology. It remains to be seen.
Yes. Okay.
It remains to be seen. Okay. So, okay, you evaluate prospects, you consider possibilities in the future, but science should be a more moderate in the sense, more guarded in its pronouncements. Big pronouncements usually lead to big failures. For the time being, and the time is not very small, almost 2 decades, the J-curve argument does not appear as a valid argument. And this is for sure. A second thing that I would like to propose is the following. Till now, AI is based on existing knowledge produced by humans. If I ask AI to tell me whether the Marxist labor theory of value is valid in the case of AI, the AI will read very fastly, so a quite big or even bigger, depending on the database and things like this, amount of sources, try to make the links through this small, how is called, are called, I don't remember the name, associate codes that associate things. The AI, the machine itself does not understand what we are talking. It works with code associating bits of data. It it can give me a futuristic view, but not a very consistent view. Now, if the machine is being fed with more data and more explicit or more sophisticated studies, it might give a better. I've actually tried that. Okay, it might give a better and more nuanced um, reply, but still it would be a very limited reply, and it will always depend on human knowledge or already created. The machine might try to reconfigure it even on its own and produce a slightly different argument. Nothing very spectacular, however. What is a scientific revolution? Scientific revolution is something that, okay, come as a past, comes from some debate in the past, or some experiments and debates in the past, but it's something new. Till now, AI has not been able to produce something like this. It can write code and quite efficiently and things like this, but a very bright idea, no. Till now, at least.
Okay, thank you. Next question is from Semyon. You can read it in the chat, but anyway, I will.
Yeah. I can
read
say
it.
I can read it. It is in English. General digitalization. Some forms of robotization and automation rely on fixed algorithms and deterministic logic rather than AI. Where could you draw the line between the digitalization that took place in the late 20th century and modern AI? Do you see a fundamental difference at the global level of the by the marketing of AI? If my memory does not fail me, I think the big leap forward in the 21st century were the so-called neural networks in AI and things like this, meaning ways to link data that try to simulate the way the human brain works, and that gave the big impetus in this. However, there are two caveats there. The one caveat is that the machine has no feelings. Of course, feelings can be pretty logical, but logic and the so-called illogical thing, the sentimental thing, have a combination in the human brain, the human mind. The machine cannot replicate this. That's the one thing. The second thing is that AI till now, and I think the sectoral data, the empirical data, the sectoral data are tantamount to this. Is applicable mainly to services and office work. However, our economies have to produce materials. In the end, we do not live on thin air. And there are problems. AI has to be combined with robotics, and there are several problems there. And the non-fu waters factory example I gave, where they coexisted three forms of work. automata, robotics, human-driven machines, and manual-driven machines. Okay, possibly are an example of this, meaning that till now we know from empirical data that the applicability of AI in hardcore production, manufacturing, construction, and things like this is pretty limited. Now, one might live in a world of Matrix, the movie, right? But in reality, we need houses, construction, we need vehicles or we need machinery, things like this. These are being produced by manufacturing construction. And okay, there are inroads there of robotics, but we know very well that there are limits. Robotics working on the basis of AI, right? But we know China is a leader in this. But we know that there are constraints and limits there. I don't know if I replied. There is another part on this question, if fundamental difference at the global level, or is the distinction partly driven by the marketing of AI? I'm not sure if I got it correctly. But the last part of this question, I think I've grasped it. There is a lot of marketing of AI, and very aggressive marketing, and sometimes pretty stupid. I mean, OpenAI, the mother of ChatGPT, for example, produced a paper in the US, and of course there were huge publicity. That's marketing, saying don't use DeepSeek because the Chinese state will spy on you. Yeah, possibly yes, but OpenAI is not immune. CIA and Langley are not far away from that. Of course, yeah, the Chinese state might spy on you, but the US state is certainly spying on you. So this is marketing. Too much, how can I say, making points out of proportion for very egotistic, profit-seeking reasons.
Yeah, sure. And there's a couple questions also. Can we consider the artificial intelligence as infrastructure for production process, like roads, like water supply, like electricity? And if yes, is there any reliable way to calculate the impact of artificial intelligence in the global productivity? For example, it's difficult to calculate the impact of electricity in general, but can we say the same thing about artificial intelligence? That there will be no real way to calculate the impact of it.
Okay, the first point is that AI is actually constant capital, and I argue for this. Okay, but now measuring productivity is quite a huge problem. It's less a problem if you measure labor productivity. The measurement problems you have are far less. It's pretty easy to measure labor productivity. It is more difficult to measure accurately total factor productivity, because total factor productivity is like a black box. Whatever I cannot explain, I throw it inside. Then to do it at a global level, it's even more difficult. In practical terms, okay, because different economies have different characteristics that might affect productivity. Okay, you can make aggregations, For example, I think in terms of energy, it's not very difficult to make a global aggregate. Some form with heroic assumptions, meaning uh, making assumptions that, okay, oscillate between reality and non-reality. But you can do it because why? Energy is a very internationalized sector, at least in the West. So you can possibly use similar metrics. Okay. But if you can do this for AI, I'm not sure. I don't venture to give an opinion. And I haven't read anything similar, anything on this. Someone trying to make a global assessment on the basis of some measurement, not just science fiction, regarding the impact of AI. So I don't have an opinion on this.
Okay, and the last question, we are a bit late, but I think we have time for the last question. So if we just imagine that one day artificial intelligence becomes independent from people, if it can produce any value by itself. So let's just imagine it. But in this case, is can be the owner of it, and is there someone who who should and can earn money for this if artificial intelligence does it by itself? Uh, do we have anyone who can earn money from it as an owner? And if not, is there any theoretical issue for economics? Okay, it can be issue for technologies, for physics and itself, but if there is no owner who can earn money from using it, um, don't economists should just leave this question and forget about it?
Okay, this is a very popular question in a sense. Have you seen a movie, actually a sequel of movies, the Planet of the Apes? The apes, the gorillas, being the servants of the human, and then the servants conquering their masters and becoming themselves the masters. It's like saying that the computers in the past, now AI, would assume this, and instead of being a helper to humans, become independent and totally autonomous from humans.
Okay, it can still serve to human. It cannot be independent from human, but
Oh,
it can
okay.
still serve for human, but it
Okay.
can produce
Who
anything
owns them?
without human.
Who owns them?
Yeah.
Um, this you cannot uh, approach this issue unless you have some form of class analysis, meaning for what type of society and economy are there classes, and what classes there are. In a capitalist economy, even a huge expansion of AI would depend on two things. One, capitalist ownership, and second, related to the first, capitalist profitability. Okay, so if there is a huge expansion of AI, and this might lead to some form of technological and industrial revolution, for which this, as I've already said, remains to be seen, of course. Uh, who will own it? Of course, the capitalist firms, under the auspices of which this expansion of AI has happened. If this can change possibly through a socialist revolution. But otherwise, no, it won't change. Capitalist firms will own AI and will reap profits out of its operation. And of course, uh, the development of technology broadly and of AI in particularly would depend on profitability. Let me try to clarify this. In the beginning of the personal computers, back in 1980s, the whole sector, PCs, personal computers, were dominated by IBM. IBM.
Mhm.
And IBM, for several reasons, preferred to use paper disks, five and the quarter disks, meaning a few kilos, just a few kilos, kilobytes of data, nothing compared to what we use today. Now, the plastic disks, three and a half, were already known, but they could not be generalized because of the dominance of IBM on the personal computers sector. So for almost a decade, although there was a technologically superior uh, solution, it was not being adopted because of the dominance because of a profit guided uh, choice. IBM controlled the sector, and then slowly IBM collapsed. And part of its collapse had to do with disks, but not only. So nowadays, IBM does not exist in the PC industry. What it remained of IBM in the late 90s was bought by the Chinese, Lenovo,
Mhm.
who bought the PC branch of IBM. So the introduction of and the use of technology in capitalism depends on the profit motive. In capitalism, a technology is being adopted not because it is the best, but it is the more profitable. And this will remain. This will remain the criterion, at least in a capitalist society. In a socialist society, it's a different story, of course,
Yeah.
because the AI would be publicly owned.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. So
You're
we are
welcome.
late a bit, but I'm sure it was a really interesting and helpful lecture. Um, so thank you everyone for listening. And the very last words, please, Stavros.
Well, uh, I hope I helped in enlightening or at least in help you think about this burning issue. And I hope that my arguments about the validity of Marxist political economy and especially the Marxist labor theory of value gave you some food for thought and possibly for developing further the Marxist labor theory of value um, in analyzing um, artificial intelligence and more broadly changes, the rapid changes we're viewing in the current times we are living, in the turbulent current times we are living.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you very much again,
You're
and
welcome.
see you. I hope someday soon.
Okay, yes. Okay, do remember to send me the recording.
Yes,
Okay.
sure.